Yes, we can start. I just want to say a couple of things about Marcela before I pass it to my colleague Ellen, where she's hosting the event tonight. Massive thanks, Marcela, for joining us for tonight. I have been knowing Marcela for a long time now, and it's always good to see her coming. Every time she's coming back, she's coming back with something completely new, and I can't wait to hear you. So, Ellen, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. So yeah, thank you. Welcome back everybody from the group today, and hello for all of you that's just joined. I think we need to give a special welcome for our friends in Vietnam who've joined us at such a late hour, but we really, really appreciate that. So welcome back to another design roast. So our focus again is on diversity and inclusivity by design. So the design roast series again has been happening for the past 8 years, and really this open discussion is for this kind of interesting kind of cross section of media, technologies, practice, interaction. So Marcela has actually joined us previously, and you can check out her lectures either from her website, from the design roast, or indeed I imagine through the YouTube. And we're basically inviting a range of industry voices to share their practice with us. So again, Marcela will be here tonight, and we've had some really interesting guests so far and more to come. So tonight, like I say, we're welcoming back Marcela Ospina, and she is a service design lead at the Department of Health and Social Care. So tonight, Marcela will be talking about this kind of really interesting, relevant topic, and it is a kind of a closely related area to what some of our students have been covering last term. So Marcela has a super interesting and diverse career path, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. She started studying anthropology, and over the last 18 years has really used this experience to kind of help clients understand people's behaviours, designing and delivering digital solutions, and also, obviously using design methodology. And I think this relates so well to what we've been covering in this module to really solve complex problems. So tonight her lecture will be surrounding those topics and more, I'd imagine. So I'll hand over shortly to Marcela. I think just a little bit about the structure. So again, it'll be about half an hour, and then we'll have plenty of time, maybe half an hour for Q&A at the end. So if anybody has got questions whilst the lecture's going on, if they can just pop them in the chat, and then we can kind of curate those at the end of it. So any kind of questions, just pop them in there. I'd just like to also say a very special thank you for Eden, who designed the poster. So thanks, Eden. Well done for that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Marcela. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for attending at these very weird times. I'm going to share my deck, but I'm going to keep it very short and sweet, because the best time of these talks is always at the end with all the questions. So yeah, let's see. I hope you enjoy it. The title of this presentation is How to Design Services, and I should say also products at fast pace. And by fast pace, I mean 2 weeks time, like things ridiculous, like really, really fast. Because, well, that's my environment at the moment. But first, a little bit about myself. As Ellie well said, I did anthropology. I lived for a long time in South Africa, and thanks to that, I was exposed to doing field work in very different contexts, including South America and other places in Africa, and more recently, since 5 years here in Europe. At the moment, I lead a team of designers at the Department of Health, and our work ranges from designing products and services for testing, but not all of these services are digital. Some of these services are actually physical. But let's say the core of my experience is on, designing for digital. All of these problems are quite complex, and the solutions need to be quite tactical at this time. But hopefully I can give you a glimpse to a little bit of the longer term of the design process as well. Most of my experience has actually been in the private sector, with telecommunication companies and design companies and management consulting companies. For the last, I think, 3 years, I've been working for different government departments, including the Department of Environment and also the Ministry of Justice and now the Department of Health. So if you want to ask me any questions at the end about all of these, you're more than welcome. So right now, as I introduced, I am developing products and services for COVID-19 test and trace division, and this entails developing a portfolio of services for the public. As you can imagine, everything is done in a fraction of the time. So if a project I used to have, let's say, I don't know, 3 weeks or 2 weeks just to do research, imagine all of that is just not possible given our timelines. So we've had to become really tactical, really smart in how we go about designing still at a good quality, but meeting timelines and deadlines. The other thing that I should add is that in this designing in this environment brings another layer of complexity, because we also have to deal with policymakers, and obviously that's also tricky. So how do I do it? So let's go through what I thought I knew at the beginning. I don't know if this is something you're familiar with. I don't know who of you study design thinking in these classes, but basically this is the Double Diamond by the Design Institute, and basically theoretically it describes how one should decide services or products. And as the diagram says, it explains that the first part should be a discovery exercise of researching what the assumptions are, what the problem is, what the problem space is, to then start diverging into different ideas, different concepts, different things that could help us solve that problem. Followed by a design process where you can play around prototypes and finally deliver whatever you're thinking about. So this is what I learned at university, and I just find it very funny that in reality it doesn't look anything like that. This is more what it looks like in my day-to-day. So generally speaking, the process that I use starts with an informed assumption. And that assumption can come from a piece of research, but can also be something that maybe we know, and then we assume that we're going to validate it throughout our process. So instead of having like a massive sort of research plan or like a very strong sort of discovery, we start with a list of assumptions. And what we do is that we validate them as we design. So it's not, I know it looks like linear in this diagram, but in reality it's far more fluid. So the design work, which I will show in the end what it looks like, but things like sketches, things like maybe diagrams, maybe ideas that materialized into something happens at the same time as we're validating. And then what is done after is to take that and put it in front of users. So do another round of user testing with the relevant people. And then based on those, we make changes to the design and we create more assumptions if that's needed. Otherwise, we just make changes to the design and we send it off to delivery. Again, like I said, I will show you all the artifacts in the end. But this is just to give you an idea that a lot of what you're going to learn in university doesn't always reflect in your working labs. And I feel like that's something that I would have liked to have heard from someone when I was studying. So what are those things that I feel like you need to know when designing at fast pace? I just drew a few principles that have helped me throughout my career, and I hope they will help you as well. So the first one that I've learned most recently is how to make pragmatic decisions, because every project is different, and in my career I haven't found a project that is perfect or that is packaged perfectly. Each problem is different, and sometimes nothing makes sense. Like I've had asks from clients where they already know the solution and there is very little input that I can give them to steer that solution. And that's really hard when you're designing, because of course you just want to be creative and you want to design something that makes a difference. But I feel like it's really important to take it with a pinch of salt and really make decisions around what is really necessary about your design and what can you do without. And that can be maybe maybe you want a piece of technology in your design, but in the first version, in the MVP of your design, in your minimum viable product, that's not possible. And those pragmatic decisions you're going to have to make, and those compromises, and it's okay, it doesn't matter, because you always have other releases to make it better, and there are always other projects where you can maybe be more creative and play around a little bit more. The second of these principles is to use the information that you have at hand and validate that information. I remember when I started doing research, I was always telling clients that I needed like a month, or like I needed like some time to analyze data. When you're designing at pace, there is no time to wait for that data and to analyze it, because then by the time you need to release, you're not done. You're not done with the first diamond that I showed you at the beginning. So what you can do is to start again with those assumptions that you had at the beginning, and use any information that you have to inform your design. And then as you go, you can validate those concepts and those ideas. So my advice is always to not wait for things to be perfect, and to start sketching or materializing whatever ideas you have, and then rather fix them as you go along, as opposed to wait. Of course, please don't generalize. There will be projects where they will give you a time, and where actually you will have the luxury of waiting. But I mean, remember, we're designing at very fast pace, and now in the current context where everything is for now, if you work for a consultancy, time is money. So generally your deadlines will be really tight. So you will be expected to design something quickly. The third thing is that what you design is as important as why you design it. And this has to do with outcomes behind your design and the value that your design brings to the world. I remember when I studied both anthropology and then experience design, I always thought that maybe the value of that design, or things like what impact is it going to have, is it going to make money, is it not going to make money, are people going to use it, or are people going to stop using it. I kind of didn't realize that it's all part of my remit of my design, because indirectly, whether you like it or not, everything that you design faces the world, and people need to value it. And generally, if it is a good design, it will have an impact on either someone's lives or on a business. And even if you're not the person responsible for that impact, it is really good that you keep it in mind. So a few tips, for instance, the one is to ask your client, what are the objectives? What are the business objectives? And then as much as you can, try and align those business objectives to your design, obviously keeping true to what your users want. But it's a balance. So it is a good starting point to ask the business, okay, what do you think about this problem? And what is it that you want if we launch this app, or if we design whatever it is that you're designing, if it is a physical product, what is the impact in the real world? And then, of course, what you do is you take it in front of users, and then you let the users inform their needs and what they really want out of the product. So the fourth advice is to show the progress of your designs. And instead of show, I think I would say share. Because, I mean, in reality, everything, especially working remotely, is about sharing. And I feel like that's really important. If you like, and again, because if you're designing in an environment that is very fast, and the more you share, the quicker you can get feedback on whatever you're doing. And that what that does is it helps you avoid making mistakes or going down a route where maybe you shouldn't have gone or spend too much time in. And I know from my colleagues and from myself that we tend to be perfectionists in this line of work. And sometimes we get fixated on the detail. But obviously it is good because that's why we are designers. But at the same time, that detail can be also our Achilles, like our weakness. Because again, if you're designing really fast, sometimes you have to make those decisions and be really lean and just design what is needed, not everything that you wanted. So a way of doing this, of sharing your progress, is to try and make a visual out of anything that you're making. And it doesn't matter, the fidelity of those artifacts is not as important. So you can have it in a sketch format, or you can have a prototype that didn't take you too long. It doesn't have to be digital. Again, it can be anything. And it's just a conversation starter, because then you can get feedback and then you can go and work on it a little bit more. So my general advice is don't wait until you're done, because then you may end up spending a lot of hours redoing what you had done. The fifth one is to critique your work with others in the team beyond the designers. In the teams I have worked, there's always someone who's more like the delivery person, so someone who's in charge of making sure that we do everything at the standard, that we meet deadlines. So those people are generally the product people. And in my case, everything I do has to be sort of reviewed with the product owner and with my manager, who's also a designer. But it is really good to bring in, let's say, your user researcher, or if it's not a digital team, if it is, I don't know what kind of design you'll be doing. But if it is within an agency, just try and bring different people to look at what you've done. And that goes in line with what I just said, that sharing your work is generally really good because of that, because you can put it to test when you put it in front of people. And then, of course, the main test is in front of the users. So the sooner you can get something in front of your users, the better. But obviously, it is good that you get used to critiquing your work internally first. Yeah, I mean, there is not a rule around this. It's more of, you'll see how you go. If you feel really confident to a prototype and then put it in front of users, then that's also fine. But yeah, just knowing that generally the first time we do something, it's not going to be perfect. And then the last one, I think, because I wanted to just do this few, is to master collaboration platforms, because right now everything is done online, and unless you can do this, it's really hard to work. So the ones I'm using right now mostly are Miro, which is a platform to share whatever you're making. The fidelity is not amazing, but you can design, you can make boards, you can design flows, you can do, I don't know, journey mapping. Maybe you can use some screen templates as well and do like very low-fi prototyping. The one that I use for tracking my work is Youre, which is like just to project manage all my tasks and just make sure all my tasks are like in order. I'm happy, like if you guys have a lot of questions around this, I can do a screen share, but I didn't include them in this presentation. And there's Confluence to keep all the work in one place. Some companies are using Figma, but each company has their own policy and their own tools that they prefer using. In government, it's tricky because a lot of these have privacy concerns. So generally, we end up just using very basic Windows themes, but it is good. I mean, it's a really practical advice to go with some sort of basic knowledge on these tools and just familiarize yourself with them and know which one fits better. Of course, there are better ones like InVision and Sketch, but I mean, again, these are for collaboration and these are more like so that anyone who is not a designer can access what you're doing and can comment, etc. So it's more around, working with these tools. Anyway, so it's very weird because I can't see your faces. I can only see my presentation, but I'm gonna assume everything's going well. And I still can see you. And I'm gonna take you through some of my process because I feel like sometimes talking about all these things doesn't really make sense until you see something. So in terms of one of the first things that I mentioned in terms of prioritizing assumptions, it could be anything physical, it could be just a list of things, it could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be anything really, and doesn't have to be an artifact. And you're just listing everything you think you know about the problem and the problem space. And generally you have one set of assumptions for users, another set of assumptions for the business, and sometimes you have a third set of assumptions for something else. And the idea is that for each assumption that you write, you're gonna test something with user research. So sometimes you know things because you know them, but you need data to prove them or to validate them. And the idea is just to go through testing them as quickly as you can, but not let, again, I repeat, not let these stop you from designing. So if you start with the assumptions and you at the same time want to give it a go to thinking about, a flow or a concept, you can, if you're designing at fast pace, if your deadlines are really tight. It's not always ideal because sometimes when you're designing that way, you jump straight into a solution. And again, that's not something I learned at university and it's not advised. But again, because we're talking about situations that are more extreme and where you're supposed to be making stuff quicker, it's okay if you're doing sort of both at the same time. And so the way it will look is you just keep it really low fidelity, and maybe if you start designing, you don't do anything too fancy at that point because chances are it's going to change a lot. Miro is a good tool in that case if you want to do that level of design. So the next step in my case, because I design services and products, I'm supposed to map a journey for the different users. So this one, for instance, was done using Miro, and I did it when I had some sort of an idea of this top layer of this top swim lane. I already had some data at this point to inform the content in the bubbles, and some of this data was already validated. But, I started sketching it earlier. And I mean, at that point, all you have to do is edit. And here you just put your resources and the kind of, whatever the data informed your journeys. And followed by these, we have some of these roles. The one was your business outcome. So what is it that the business wants out of these? And then, of course, what is it that the user wants out of the service? And in these boxes, what we did here was to start thinking about the opportunities to address the problem. This is more, I mean, you need a little bit more time when you're thinking about opportunities, because, you know, opportunities are slightly more, is where you can think about the problem in different ways. Whereas, let's say, the way I'm designing right now is more focused to more solutions rather than big opportunity spaces. It's slightly different. I would say this is for when you have more time, but I still do a lot of journey mapping, and this kind of a flow sometimes is much more just boxes, nothing fancy. This kind of a flow is what we collaborate with the developers and the digital teams to then make screens based on that. So, for instance, from here, if you're using like a collaboration tool and the designers and the developers are commenting, you can then translate those into a prototype and then just design screens. Again, I know this makes more sense if you do digital design, but I mean, the logic should apply if you're doing sort of an offline, you know, service, or if it is a store design. You still would want to know the steps that a user is going to go through before making it into something. Generally, when it comes to this stage, well, in my environment, it's almost launch day, which is really rare. But when it takes more time, you have the luxury of going through a few rounds of research on the screens. And then what it means is that you can put it in front of users. They can tell you, you can observe if the screens are working or not, if you need to make any changes on content or otherwise. And then you go through at least 2 rounds of research before the service goes live, before it's coded, basically, and before it goes live. There are all sorts of constraints regarding that. Some of the constraints are regarding the development of the platform in which your service is going to live, and that has dependencies as many times beyond the designer's control. So at this point, in most companies, your job is done. If you work in agencies or if you work in consulting firms, most of the time you test it. You do the screens, and then you give it to the developers and to the product manager. But in the situation I'm in now, my job is involved end-to-end throughout the process until delivery. And generally, it would be a product person. I'm more on the service side, but generally it would be a product person being responsible for what kinds of features to add in the next releases. And this will make sense if I show you this. Sorry, I had to blur the content. But basically, the way you do this is by creating a roadmap. And as I showed you, you have the screens for the first release of whatever you're designing. So when you do this roadmap and you can see, okay, I need to have a few changes in a period of, like, let's say a month. And so what you do is you list all the features that you want to add in the next releases, and then also what other possible services or products could come after your current one. So in that way, you have sort of a plan of where you're going, and then you kind of know, okay, for this release, I couldn't do something really amazing with the technology or something really innovative. Maybe in the next release you can do it. But again, like I said, this is good for you guys to keep an eye on. And I really like roadmaps, but again, it depends on your work environment. Sometimes you don't get to do them yourselves. I would say it's really good practice to create your own roadmap even if, you can offer. I like them. I think they're very practical. Yeah, and this is my favorite part. So all the questions. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, certainly when I was hearing you talk, although we're doing a big group project at the moment in our module, we're not doing a digital product as such, but certainly a lot of those ideas I felt would translate especially well. We're needing to kind of get things done quite quickly, so yeah, I don't know whether any of the students have any questions before I also have a couple of more things that I would like to ask myself, but do any of you guys have questions? Everybody too tired.
I can ask quickly.
Yeah, go on, Sandra.
Like you were talking about the progress of the design and all the development and etc. But where is the start for the concept? Like, how do you get there is a general idea, but how do you flow to that point where the concept becomes the huge thing to continue the process of that scheme or following that design?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so when you have time, like I showed on the journey map, when those boxes below, like the colorful boxes, we wrote our opportunities there. Those were sort of the concepts, which were the opportunities to then think about solutions, about the problems that we had mapped out before. And then based on those concepts, that's when you start the actual hands-on design. But because of the way I'm designing right now, I don't always have that step, and I have to think much quicker about the actual features or the actual things that go in the design, and use the assumptions to validate, like the assumptions, validate them, and then add them onto the actual screens, if you like. So there is no such a step around discussing the concept and thinking about the idea so much. But I mean, in general, yeah, then you will have the opportunities, and from there, think about the concept.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that help, Sandra?
Maybe I can come in before Ellen comes in. Is that all right?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I think William has got a question as well, but
Okay,
we don't want to hog it. We don't want to hog it too much.
Marcela, I'm going back to what I said at the beginning about you going from one part of service design to another. So you've been dealing with people with marginalized groups, let's say, in the past, and now you're dealing with issues of the pandemic or people or trying to find solutions to problems through digital means. So how do you find this journey as a designer, as a service designer, thinking about from one point of view, you might be working on a project that's more into hands-on, meeting people, engaging with people, empowering people. And from the other side, you come to more kind of digital empowerment. How do you see this journey? I'm here to complicate questions. That's why my role here is to complicate people.
Yeah, it's interesting because all the work happens online. Like my interactions with people are in user testing, and they're in front of a prototype. So it's like a different kind of relationship. But because the pandemic is something that every single one of us is enduring at the moment, is just very real. So, I feel like I'm one of the users because it's something that concerns everyone. What helps me, what we do a lot is to use something called use cases. So it's something that you imagine, like you speak as if you are the person. So it's always in the I, and then you have I want to do this, or I want to achieve this, or I want to get tested, so that, and then you continue with an explanation. So I feel like that's the way of, I don't know, making the design a little bit more real, and bringing it closer to people. But it's not without challenges. I wish it was far more, that I had more time to research. I wish I could talk to people in person, but those are the limitations.
If I can add on this, I mean, your journey in general, I mean, from one project to another, how easy you can, or easy or difficult, or I don't know how you see it, is this kind of shift from one project? Because, for the university students, there is a continuity in a way on the way they have the projects and the briefs. What about in real life? I mean, how, like, the shifting from one challenge project to another, how does this shifting, switch on, switch off happen?
Look, I mean, each project is different because I'm a consultant. There's different career paths, I suppose. So maybe it's worth talking about that. I've always been moving across projects because I consult, so by nature you're supposed to move. So I'm used to it. I've done it a lot, and it's always exciting to change because I get bored working on the same thing for a long time. But there's another career path, and it's to choose a product or a service or a company that you really like. And then within that company, obviously, it's fluid because you have a number of products. There's generally a portfolio, but there's more consistency in you know what you're there for, and you're working around the same sort of products or ideas. But it depends. If your choice is consulting, it is part of what you do. So in my case, I've just done it for too long, and I don't know, I'm used to it. I like it. I couldn't do it. I don't think I would like to do just one product. It'll be too long because then each release, it'll be of the same thing, and I think I would get tired.
I have a couple of questions that have come in now. Eden, do you want to, I don't want to talk through your questions. I think you should all ask them yourselves.
That's fine. Hi, Marcela. My question was, you mentioned that in between each design process, there was a step of validation. My question is, what is the process of the validation? Who is validating? What is the source? Could you just explain more on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the validation, it depends. It could be anything. It could be a report that you have that your client gave you, and that's your validation. Generally, as designers, no, that's not great, because if you're designing, let's say, something for children, ideally you want to put your design in front of children and let them play and let them interact. So generally if you work for a big corporation, they have teams, and you can have a researcher and then put questions for that researcher. I know not everybody here is doing digital design, so I'm trying to think in the physical life or the space it would be with a product. It'll be putting the product in front and asking questions. In digital, you create a scenario and you create some mock-ups of screens like the ones I showed, and they're not real. They seem real, but they aren't. Or you create like a functional sort of version of the site, but it's private, like no one else can see it. And then you just ask people to go through those steps and watch and ask them questions. I'm trying to think about more physical kind of design, but and then obviously there's research that is not about that. There's research that is about understanding the problem, understanding why, and it's generally why would people use these? Why is this problem worth solving? And for that, again, you work with a researcher, maybe to ask questions to the relevant people, or do a survey. And generally, I mean, it's good to do surveys because they're quantitative. So yeah, it's generally a mix. In service design, a lot of us are researchers as well, because it's a good skill to have when you're designing. Yeah, so after actually there are quite a few jobs in doing digital sort of testing and research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. We have a question from Andreas, if his internet isn't fallen over. He's on mute, so it might help. Andreas, are you there? We also have a question from, is it good, Ghana? I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yes, hello. Sorry, I want to apologize in advance. My camera doesn't seem to cooperate. I'm really sorry. I want to say, Marcela, a big thank you for your presentation and the lovely explanation. So my question is that I'm really interested in the your work at the present moment in regards to COVID situation. Because it's really close to the topic that I'm actually writing on my dissertation. So my main question for you is, where do you get inspiration from on that topic? For me, it's really challenging. So I would be happy to hear your inspiration on that.
Yeah, well, because we're trying to make the services better for people so that people get tested. So that's the ultimate goal. The inspiration comes from services that work well, and they don't have to be COVID related, obviously. So things like simple things like Slack, like Amazon, like it doesn't matter. It could be any service of any kind. That's always an inspiration, because again, if you're thinking about features, you're thinking about, oh, okay, one of our biggest goals is always to reduce the number of steps that someone has to go through. So any other service that does that successfully is an inspiration. And then also we're looking at what other countries have done, countries that have been successful and what they have done. That's also an inspiration that we use a lot. And then obviously what not to do always also helps. And then I like the whole thing about thinking about the future, no? Like, okay, designing for now looks like this, and what is it like? What would the end state be like? What would be our ideal? And that helps a lot, because sometimes when you think about the end, you can work backwards and then see, how could you get there? So yeah, sort of that.
Yes, really hard to imagine, but thank you very much for your answers. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you could think of, like, for instance, something that I use a lot is to think of a scenario where everybody is getting tested all the time, and how would that be possible? Or how, another good question is how to create healthy habits, how to get people to do the right thing. So you can ask yourself those questions and work backwards and get to your answer.
Yes, I see the logic now. Thank you. That really helps. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Perfect. I think we've got Andreas now. He can do audio only. Sorry, Guillermo, I will let you.
Yes, hello. Hi, Marcela. So I was wondering, what's the most recent COVID-related project that you're working on, and what are you finding the most challenging about it?
I can't talk about any of that in detail, so I'll make it very general. It's all around testing, and it's all around services for reaching a large number of people. So yeah, and the services include, like I said, a digital journey, like full, step-by-step testing service online, and then also points, like physical points. And then the most challenging is to coordinate the whole experience. Because the experience is really tricky, like have to make sure that people are getting the same experience across all of these points. And also I find really challenging that I don't have time to do enough research. And also, it's just a rush, and that there's too many room for mistakes. because of dates, because it's urgent, because, you know, we have to deliver on time. And also a good one, if you're gonna work in technology, is that our work as designers have a lot of dependencies on technology. So if, for instance, a platform, so if, for instance, the developers doing the platform have constraints, there's nothing you can do as a designer about it, and that's really frustrating. And it happens a lot. So yeah, those are things you have to learn to live with and try and, you know, be nice about it.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. So we've got, well, yeah, Guillermo, go ahead, sorry.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, thanks. It was really interesting. My question goes back to like some of the very early things that you just said right at the beginning in relationship to your background as an anthropologist. And I'm just because I'm really curious, because many times when I've been thinking myself, like if I didn't study design, what I could have studied, it would have possibly been anthropology. So I'm very interested in this connection in between the two disciplines. So on the one hand, I wanted to ask you, what are the skills from being an anthropologist that have been useful to yourself as a designer? And that's one. And then also as a general advice to designers from the perspective of an anthropologist, what's the advice that you would give to designers in terms of what should we be careful and what should we be looking at when we work on a project?
Advice from an anthropology point of view, or okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so to answer the first question, the main skills that I have used in design from anthropology have been ethnographic, like observation. I have to understand what people really value and anticipate sometimes how will they use something, if something is going to land well or not with them. Also, back in the day, I used to do a lot of anthropology for businesses. And now it's really important, and I did mention in my presentation, but businesses, I mean your clients or the company you work for, they are also people, they are also users of the service indirectly, but you also have to consider them. And that's also something that anthropology has helped me do. And I mean the obvious one, which is at the basis of all design, which is empathy. And, you know, studying anthropology helped me get into that of putting myself into the shoes of someone else. And so the main advice I give to other designers is to always be observing and not, again, that's why when I talked about assumptions at the beginning, and they are assumptions, not facts. And it really requires to be a very good observer to understand that, understand these things, and also not take them, not assume them as facts. And sometimes you have to be that guy as a designer to ask all the questions and to, and sometimes people don't want to hear them, but that's okay. That's okay. That's our role. And I think research is really good. Research, as in anthropology, observing, asking questions is really good. It's a really good background to give us that sort of, you know, credibility, if you want to call it.
Thanks.
Sure.
I think we have a question from Siriani.
Yes, hello. I'm Jani. Following Guglielmo's, I would like to ask, why do we call this experience design and not something else? How did we come to this point? And also, how do we explore a common universal language? How do we design so that this platform or this thing reaches to each one of us, if that makes sense?
Yeah, both very good questions and therefore hard to answer. How did we come to experience design is an interesting one because it's new. It's not new, but like it also came from different things. I mean, all of these disciplines actually stem from systemic design, systems thinking, and then when computer came and informatics, they actually usability and everything that was related to user experience fell under the remit of IT, basically, like information technology. And it was only, and I mean, Anastasius may know this better than me, but I'm gonna say early 90s, probably late 80s, that someone occurred that the user aspect, the user component, the human, it has to do with the user and its experience of use. And I can't feel how it evolved to experience design, but I guess in my view it makes sense in this because what we're designing is holistic. It's not just one thing. It has to do with different people, different points of connecting, different mediums of communicating. Also, something really important in the work I do is what operations happen in the business, like what kinds of process impact the design, what kind of technology the design. And so from that perspective, it's really important to consider everything. And that's between like.
Have we lost her?
I think we lost her completely there. We'll get her back and she can answer the question again. It's going so well. Yeah, I wasn't sure whether that was my signal or hers, but I think it was.
Yes, I'm waiting.
Hi.
You're back.
Marcela, you cut off. Now we did hear you broken for a little while before you disappeared.
Oh, no.
I was hoping it was going to improve, but when you were talking about user, the aspect from the user, could you go from there essentially? If that's
yes. No, so sorry. I think it was, and here, excuse me, because my history skills fail me, but it was either Jacob Nielsen no, I believe it was Don Norman, who used to work in Apple. And so basically, like, he coined the term, at least as far as user experience goes, and the discipline. And then basically what the way the field has broadened is because it encompasses various points of interaction with those users. So instead of whatever you're designing being part of a digital world or a platform, now we're designing for how people feel when they visit the space, for how people experience filling in a form, how people complete feedback, how people, for instance, in COVID, it's really important that people report their results back. Why would someone go out of their way to go and say I'm positive or to go and say I'm negative, especially when people are going to be chased and their friends are going to be called. So it raises a million issues that fall beyond the remit of physical design or just digital design. You have to consider the psychology of the person, how do people behave in certain situations, how the context of the person influences their interaction with the service. So I believe there's a reason for calling it experience design. But I am with you. I think it should be more universal. We just haven't come up with a better term. I also have heard being called strategic design, but not many people use that term. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just an observation. I mean, obviously designing these products such as, say, COVID, where the whole population has got to interact with them, it's so much different than if you were, say, even designing digital products that have a particular kind of niche audience, and I'm sure your use cases and these ways that you're testing these assumptions must just be exponentially more complex. Sorry, Siriani, did you want to jump in with something else?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, it may sound a bit silly, but I wanted to ask, how do we translate I mean, on which level do we translate the statistics and in terms of the actual results? Like, how accurate can something like this be? How far are we from the human factor, if it makes sense? Or how close?
Like, you mean, how do we?
Sorry.
How close are we to? Sorry, how close are we to
our answers? And yeah.
If I can come in, maybe what she means is that because data is in our days informing our design process so massively, and I think that perhaps what Siriani is asking is that how up to what level we can trust data where the final outcome can really be accurate. Is that correct, Siriani?
Thank you.
That's good. No, I mean, I'm a firm believer that data has a role to play in everything we do, and that's great. I mean, because of course you have to use it to inform decisions. But I also believe a lot in people's intrinsic motivations, and they change. I don't know if you've heard, like, when you ask people who they're gonna vote for, those polls are generally inaccurate, and people, like, because people, I mean, you can't measure all sorts of emotions and emotional flows that a user goes through, and decision making is actually very complex. And so I don't think in regards to decision making, I think it's very complex, and therefore our work as designers, empathizing, putting things in front of people a million times, it's really valuable. But yeah, I mean, if you look at what happened with manipulation of election results with Facebook, it's scary. I mean, of course it works, and of course it's effective. But I think for the kind of work we do, which is more around designing something that has value to people, something that is potentially going to change their lives, essentially, I think there you need far more of a set of understanding people, understanding their needs, empathizing. It sounds like a little bit soft, but you know, it is. You do have to put yourself through all the things that they have to go through in order to understand them. So, yeah.
Thank you.
That's really great. Does anybody else have any more questions? It's around about 8 o'clock, so we might begin to wrap up. Do shout up if you have anything.
I would like to ask something, if possible.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, how can we find the right information about the target audience to create a customer journey mapping? And are there any tools or technique that we can add to our practice to make that journey more believable?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. I can pop in the chat if the references are used, but basically to organize the journey, the data, you can use a number of platforms if you want to get panels, or if you want to get a set of people with certain characteristics. I don't know the names off the top of my head, but I'll find them out for you, because there's a few platforms that do it for you. You don't have to do it yourself. Otherwise, unfortunately, we still depend on recruitment, which is just asking an external person to recruit people with these characteristics. It really helps that you create a form with the criteria of the people that you want to reach. Again, this is generally the work of the researcher, but there will be times where you are expected to do it. I suppose in your thesis, if you're going to write one, you have to do it yourself. So that would be my recommendation, to write that form and have it and give it to, I mean, obviously, if you don't have money to pay, it's quite tricky, but the idea is to have that criteria set to reach out to these people. I know we're doing a lot of communities reaching, so we reach out to people in a certain group of community online, and yeah, online panels are popular, where you build a panel of up to 5,000 people, and you ask them questions, you put questions there, and then they answer. There's a million ways. The problem is And I would say the main limitation, you need money, because people want to get paid themselves, and then obviously the person who's getting the interview is for you. But I mean, there are ways. I mean, when I did my thesis, I think I did it on my first job, and so I wrote so basically my use case, like all my users were in my work, and then ex colleagues of mine. Sorry, I wish there was an easier way to answer this, but I mean, if I think of some names, I can put them. And then in terms of the journey mapping, the best way is to include some sort of visual aid in your questionnaire, and just kind of let people think about stages, and then inform your journey map that way. And it helps if you record everything, and then also it helps if someone goes with you. So whilst one of you is asking the questions, the other person is drawing. Yeah, I hope this helps.
Thank you. It would be great to get the resources for those platforms that you did say that might help with that.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
No.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess if you're doing this kind of project in an agency in the future, you're going to have these resources. So anything that you do here is, you know, it's kind of a bit abnormal, but a really good practice to try and do that. And it will teach you a load of skills that, you might have a more specialist who works with you, but I think it's a really good thing to have an overarching perspective on how these things work. So sorry, Siriani, did you have another question?
Last one, please. I wanted to ask, what would you say would be the next step in experience design relating our future experiences?
I think everything, okay, the things that are in our area, maybe that we play around, is anything that has to do with virtual reality, so things that alternate reality. But again, I take things like that with a pinch of salt. I haven't done any in my experience, because the projects are still, there's still technology issues with basic things like a website, never mind doing anything remotely like virtual reality. But a lot of it has to do with AI, with automation, with robotics and things like that. I haven't done anything that fancy. I mean, I'm trying to think about something that I've heard of or have seen, but no. I think with the problems that we have is just, something that goes around a lot in our industry is analyzing things as a system. And I think I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of talk about systems thinking, which is a discipline, I think it's from the 70s, and it's come back, like to analyze complex systems and use concepts from like environmental sciences and other disciplines to construct or build the idea of the problem. But I mean, again, it's hard to talk when I haven't worked in something in particular. So sorry.
Thank you very much again.
It's more in the known world than the kind of speculative pulling it out and coming back in. There's only so far when you can go usually, I guess, in the professional sphere, when you're kind of got a client who has particular demands and needs. You can't kind of speculate too far outside the brief, or
exactly. That's very good advice. Also, I feel like that's very practical advice if you're gonna work in industry, because exactly you have to work with the constraints. And like I'm saying, like there's been problems with the platforms as it is, in terms of a website, in terms of an app, a million things can go wrong. So just to start there, like, so if you start getting even more fancy than that, imagine the million issues. So I think it's also about adoption, no? And what we're familiar with and what scares people, which is, something else.
That's great. Perfect. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, I'd just like to again thank Marcela so much for her time tonight. It's been really great, and a big round of applause. And thanks everybody for all your questions. It's been a long session with our gang from 3 o'clock. So really appreciate everybody taking the time tonight. And again, a big thank you to Marcela.